you've just arrived in Utah and you'd like to have some conversations with Latter-day Saints, but you're not an expert in Mormonism, maybe you're not really interested in becoming an expert on the Latter-day Saint faith, that's okay. I'm going to give you some tips on how you can start conversations today, even just walking away from this video. When I'm on the street, when I'm handing out tracts, and I'm trying to start conversations with Latter-day Saints, I love to ask, where are you from? And if I get a sense of where they grew up, where they went to high school, I also like to ask, did you go on a mission? Where did you go on a mission? And those two questions are really helpful. What's your background? Where'd you grow up? And did you go on a mission? Now, a mission for Latter-day Saints is more than just an opportunity to share their faith. It's a kind of coming of age. It's a maturation event. It's a pretty special window of time for Latter-day Saints. Even for ex-Mormon Christians, they have a lot of sweet memories of God working in their life. So I love to ask open-ended questions like, what are some great memories you have on your mission? What are some highlights from your mission? What are some things that really stood out? What are some takeaways? With both of these paths, I like to ask, did you ever get to meet any born-again Christians? So for example, if someone says, I went to Alta High School, I like to ask, hey, well, did you ever have any born-again or evangelical or Protestant? You might have to kind of add a bunch of terms to give them the general sense of the born-again Christian category. But did you ever have any acquaintances or friends that you talked with? And if they say yes, I like to say, well, were you ever able to talk about faith or God or theology? Go back to someone who's been on a mission. I like to ask, were you ever able to speak with born-again Christians about faith and doctrine? And typically, especially if somebody has been in the Bible Belt, they'll say, oh, yes, I have. And I love to follow up by asking in both cases, what were you able to talk about? My agenda here is to help my Latter-day Saint neighbor, my conversation partner, to put topics on the table that I can work with and build upon. I also want to work with existing conversations that other Christians have had with my Latter-day Saint conversation partner. I don't want to make friends by throwing any other Christians under the bus. What I instead want to do is get a sense for what they've already talked about. So that's really helpful to me. Another question I love to ask in these paths of conversation is, have you ever heard the gospel explained before by a born-again Christian? Have you ever heard the gospel from an evangelist before, or an evangelical? And if they say yes, then you can simply follow up with, well, what did they say? And that gives you a great opportunity to gauge their understanding of the gospel. Maybe they were given a great presentation of the gospel, but it didn't quite click, or they didn't correctly process it. Or maybe they had an inadequate explanation of the gospel, and you get to correct it or build upon that now. So what that's really doing is it's putting topics or putting content on the table for me to work with and ask more follow-up questions. If they say they've never heard the gospel explained before by a born-again Christian, firstly, this serves as a provocation of your own heart. Hopefully it stimulates your sense of compassion. I talk to a lot of Latter-day Saints here in Utah, a lot of non-Latter-day Saints as well. And when they say they've never heard the gospel before, it just gives me a sense of realism. Oh my goodness, I'm talking with somebody who's lived perhaps for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in this state, and they've never heard the gospel before. So what I love to follow up with in that case is to simply ask, may I? And if their body language is such that they look like they want to book it, they don't want to be sticking around for 10, 20 minutes, I might say, it'll only take me a few minutes. But hopefully someone's a little bit more patient and curious, and I'm able to share the narrative of the gospel. Another thing that's helpful for me is when a topic does come up and a Latter-day Saint maybe gives their own explanation of that topic, I love to ask, and this is something my friend Rich taught me, I love to ask, have you ever heard a born-again Christian explain that topic before? Have you ever heard an evangelical take on that topic before? Or to ask, what's your understanding of what our understanding of that is? In your understanding of mainstream Christianity, how does that kind of fit into the larger picture? Another thing I love to do is I love to share Bible verses. I know you do too, you're a Christian. So for us believers, the Bible is very sweet and precious and authoritative, and even when it hurts, we want to gobble up all the discomfort. We want it to have its full say on our life. But for Latter-day Saints, they're not there yet. So I don't want to shy away from the Bible at all. But one of the things, simple things I like to do when I'm pulling out my Bible is to say, may I show a Bible verse to you about that? May I show something to you from the Gospel of John about that? And just a polite way of introducing God's Word, and it kind of creates some peaceful space for doing that. And finally, there is a silver bullet question. I'm overstating, it's not really a silver bullet, but a very helpful question. When I am in a conversation and I freeze and I don't know what I'm supposed to say next and my mind goes blank, I do have a utility belt question that I do pull out that's been very helpful to me. I love to ask, what would you say are some of the biggest and most important differences between the Latter-day Saint faith and mainstream Christianity? You could ask that, like, what would you say, in your view, are the most important teaching differences between historic Mormonism or the Latter-day Saint faith and Protestantism or evangelicalism or classical or historic Christianity? You can pick your term of choice. And when they give me suggestions for what most importantly differentiates the two, and they're not very interesting sometimes, I just am polite and I nod and I like to say, what else? And I love to provoke to prompt my Latter-day Saint conversation partner to put other topics on the table that they have introduced of their own initiative in some sense. And I love to kind of steer that toward the nature of God and the gospel, and so that we can talk about things that most matter.